In Limbus company, the identities available to the player are often based on characters you have encountered throughout the game's story. Canto 7 is no exception, giving us Bloodfiend's the Fang Hunt Office, as well as identities of other specific characters we've met on our journey. However, one of the factions we've met was notably missing, the Firefist Office. During the release of Canto 7, despite the low amount of screen time they got, the Firefist Office became a fan favorite, and as the popularity of the faction rose, so did the expectations for an identity that represents them. But time passed, and Firefist never came, forcing players to lose hope in getting the new Burn identities. However, all of that changed during Limbus Company's second anniversary. During the livestream, Kim Ji-hoon said, and I quote, "Yesterday was Tuesday, so there was a new ID teaser, Don Quixote. Other than that, to celebrate the second anniversary, we thought what ID would people want? That's right, Firefist Office Gregor will be added with East Sync Don Quixote. I wanted to share this small news with you as well." So yeah, the prayers were not left unanswered, and the community finally got their beloved Firefist. But is the identity any good, or does it exist solely for fanservice? In today's video I want to answer that question. We'll do that by looking at Gregor's kit, and then talking about whether his addition can shake up the burn meta and push the team's power even further. But before we start, I have to tell you that most of my viewers are not subscribed. So if you find yourself coming back to my videos, or end up enjoying this one, consider subscribing. It takes just 1 second and helps me out a lot. Without further ado, let's get back to the Firefist Survivor. Gregor has the most HP out of all burn identities, sitting at 230. All of his skills deal blunt damage, and his Sin Affinity spread features Lust, Wrath and Gloom, with Wrath being present on both his second and third skill. Gregor's first skill is Flamethrow, which reaches 15 power with conditionals and inflicts 2 burn with its first coin. The second one consumes 15 District 12 fuel, Gregor's unique resource, to inflict 2 burn count. His second skill is... I'll burn away every last drop of your filthy blood. What's with Project Moon and these long-ass skill names? Anyways, the skill goes up to 20 power with conditionals, and when the coins of the skill consume fuel, they deal 15% more damage. The bonus is increased to 30% if the fuel is overheated. We'll get to what that means a bit later. The first coin of the skill inflicts 2 burn, and then consumes 10 fuel to inflict 2 burn on 2 enemies with the least burn potency. The second coin does the same thing but for burn count, and only inflicts 1 of it against 2 enemies. Gregor's third skill is, of course, Firefist. This skill's power scales with both burn potency and count, and with max conditionals it reaches 26 power. On use, Firefist consumes up to 25 fuel, and deals plus 2% more damage for every fuel consumed. This is increased to plus 4% damage if the fuel is overheated. After attack, if Firefist kills the target, or if it consumes fuel, Gregor gains 2 blunt damage up next turn. The first 2 coins of the skill inflict 2 burn and 1 burn count each, if the skill consumed fuel. The third one, however, gets even more damage bonuses from fuel consumed, mirroring those of the on-use effect, allowing the third coin to deal up to 3 times its normal damage from the skill's effects alone. Gregor's defensive skill is a Clashable Counter, which reaches 16 power entirely unconditionally. It gives Gregor 100 fuel at combat start, and inflicts 1 burn on hit. Moving on to Greg's passives, we can finally learn how the fuel works. He starts with 100 fuel, and the stack does not go above 100. If he is at 50 or less fuel, District 12 fuel is replaced by overheated fuel, which increases the damage of some of his skills. Gregor's real passive is I'm the Only Survivor, which requires 3 Res Resonance to activate. When active, it allows Gregor to deal extra damage based on the amount of fuel he has consumed during the encounter. The bonus damage is increased if the enemy is a Blood Fiend, Blood Bag, or simply has a sum of burn and burn count of 30 or more. Also, as long as Gregor has any amount of fuel, whenever he staggers or kills an enemy with burn, he inflicts 2 burn count against 2 random enemies with the least burn count. Firefist's support passive also requires 3 Res Resonance, and it allows one ally with the fastest speed to deal more wrath damage based on burn on target. With that, we're done with Gregor's kit. Now let's talk about how strong he is. And the first thing I have to say is that Firefist Survivor Gregor is really strong. He gets good power on all of his skills and has an especially good clashable counter, which has the same power as his skill 2 without conditionals. In the damage department, Gregor also does really well. His passive makes sure he gets a decent damage buff when long rest chains are happening, and all of his skills can deal immense damage if you use them with overheated fuel. Speaking of fuel, this is really the only thing you need to keep in mind with Gregor on your team. Ideally, you want to use your first skills when you have a lot of fuel, so that skills 2 and 3 can hit harder. But that's only feasible when looking at Firefist in a vacuum. More realistically, you mainly want to focus on using his third skill between 25 and 50 fuel for maximum damage. Of course, refueling is also very important, as in longer encounters, forgetting to use his counter to get more fuel leads to Gregor dealing much less damage than he should, especially with Firefist. Now, if we look at Gregor's burn infliction, he, once again, performs really well. If his skills have fuel to consume, Gregor can inflict a ton of burn, while also spreading it among enemies to make hitting conditionals easier for his teammates. So with all that, I think you can tell that Gregor is an identity that is very rewarding, but also pretty easy to pilot. This makes the Firefist Survivor one of Gregor's best identities, and some might even go as far as to call it his best one outright. Now, I am a little skeptical of that claim, with Priest Gregor running around and all that, but it's up to you to make an opinion on that. As for using him on your burn team, it's pretty obvious he has to be on there. He's too good to pass up. However, for the first time since Limbus Company's release, we have to make a decision of which burn ID we want to switch out for the new one. And I do have to say that I haven't made up my mind on that fully just yet. But I think Gregor will replace one of the old Lu identities, although I can't tell you which one. Now, as for how and when to use Gregor, it's pretty simple as well. Much like Don Sinclair, he is a damage dealer, who benefits greatly from Res Resonance chains. Give him that, a stacked passive and 25 fuel, and Firefist will do 260% bonus damage with its last coin, even before taking the buff from the rest chain into consideration. And now that we're on the topic of rest chains, let's talk about Gregor's Sin Affinity spread. The Firefist Survivor is one of the few identities that have 2 skills with the same Sin Affinity in their kit. This is good for 2 reasons. First, it just makes it easier to make Wrath Chains, which are the most important type of Sin Resonance for the burn team. But second, this makes Gregor's passive a lot better. Now, we've had bonus damage passives that require 3 Rest Resonance in burn before. Both Lu Ishmael and Rodya use them to deal damage. But as I've said in my Lu Yisang video, I believe those passives are inherently flawed, as the strongest skills of those identities do not have Wrath Affinity, making the effect of the passive weaker. Gregor, however, gets to use the full power of Firefist more often, as it is Wrath. You could also say that this would be the case if only the third skill had Wrath, and you would be correct. But his skill 2 being Wrath increases the amount of times Gregor can activate his passive, And if you remember the fact that his second skill also has damage buffs, you can realize that buffing that skill more often is also not redundant, as with a fully stacked passive and overheated fuel, it almost reaches double damage, making the additional rest skill all the more important. Also, funnily enough, Gregor doesn't exactly prefer boss fights or human encounters by design, as his passive is pretty clearly split into two parts, with the first one being more geared towards dealing more damage to bosses, while the second part makes him better at inflicting burn on multiple enemies at once. So use the man wherever you want. I am sure he won't mind having more targets to burn. And that concludes my overview of the Firefist Office Survivor Gregor. He's a powerful identity with great damage output, clashing and burn infliction. His fuel system also makes him more fun to play, as you sometimes have to get your eyes off of the win rate button and use a counter or two to keep the damage buffs going. The last fun fact I want to leave you with is that you know how some people joke about Fire Punch when talking about this identity? Yeah, the jokes are reality now, as this identity is literally called Fire Punch Gregor in the files. You'll love to see that. If you disagree with this video or have something to add, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll make sure to read each and every one of them. If you enjoyed the video at any point, leave a like to let me know, and consider subscribing to not miss out on my new content. And there will be new content, I promise you, it's not just going to be identity reviews forever. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye!